Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of the build, but part 3 of the video series, turning this Soviet MiG-23 into our Cold War reversal U.S. Navy interceptor. I want to say, MiG-23 to F-14, but obviously it's not going to be exactly what the F-14 was, but we're gonna do everything we can to make it, similar to it. So, since the last episode, I've gotten some new supplies in. I got the decals we'll be working with. Finally, I'm so excited I was able to source the actual full-color VF-111 Sundowners decals, and got some great options, and we'll look at those, and we'll actually use the decals sort of in our parts development, our parts choosing. I got some Quick Boost resin, Martin Baker GRU7 ejection seats. Now you can see I've already been working with one off camera a little bit in terms of fitting it in the cockpit. We'll talk about that later. And I went ahead, even though we had the testers weapons, they're very short on detail, so I got the Meng long and medium range air-to-air missile set, which gives us really great choices for Phoenix missiles. The AIM-54A and C, which, an F-14A would have carried either one of them, and it gives us two choices for AIM-7s as well, the AIM-7E and the AIM-7M, so we can do, those missiles that the Tomcat would have carried from just about any time frame, which is awesome when we fit it here. And I've got just plenty of Sidewinders from various kits in stock, just hanging around here. So a few more tools to add to this build. I also have the TCS ECM chin pod somewhere in this messy desk. A resin replacement that we can work on putting in here that would have been under nose of the F-14. I can't identify it right now. And then from eBay, another set of F-14 parts, I believe from, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, if they're from the Hasegawa or the Tamiya F-14A, but the really important part is, well, we got lots of parts that I'm not even going to use. We got the platypus tail. We've got white metal wheel hubs and rubber wheels. We've got some parts from the engine, but what we really needed, what was really important, were the vertical stabilizers. Because what I need to figure out is if we are going to go with the original MiG-23 vertical stabilizer or if we're going to use one from the F-14. And the reason is these markings, these decals, are very specific to the F-14 tail. And if we're going to use them, let me show you what I'm talking about here. The F-14 just has such a unique shape to the vertical stabilizer. I went ahead and put this one together. If you look, if we're going to use the MiG-23's stabilizer, it's going to really affect what we can kind of put in terms of decals on there, especially if you remember too, this gets painted. This is I can't think of the word right now, but this is damn it. This is a radio opaque covering for an antenna and stuff, so it's very different than the F-14 stabilizers that are on there. Using this versus this changes the profile of this plane very dramatically. It goes from what is very recognizable as a MiG-23 to something very, very different. It has a little bit of F-111-ish look to it like this, I think. And even E3. Not E3. The Sky Warrior. The A3B Sky Warrior. Or the B-66 in Air Force service. But it really changes the look of this plane a lot to replace that. It is not at all the same shape. So that's going to be a big decision in working on this. Now, it is a what if. We can do whatever we want, but it really is a big decision to undertake. I cut out the stabilators just so we can kind of get a full picture of how this all goes together. And I think, you know, we can make this vertical fit there. We can make it go on the plane and have a very unique look. I mean, it's going to be a unique plane either way. But I love the angles on the MiG-23 stabilizer. So we're going to be losing some of that. Now, I don't want to do a whole lot of conversion. I know that we can graft, you know. We can do all kinds of crazy surgery to include this part of the fillet and everything. But that would also mean some really crazy work on the markings too. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I'm just trying to come up with a workable solution and a semi-believable solution too. You know, suspension of disbelief that this is an actual fighter. One of the reasons that the MiG-23 had that huge ventral fin there was because its vertical stabilizer was not big enough to provide enough directional stability. We're taking that off and we're adding these small F14 fins on there. So maybe we do go with the larger stabilizer on top to tell that story as well. You know, lots of options. As for the seat, the Martin Baker seat just is huge compared to the cockpit here. So you can see, compared to, now F14 is a 2-seat aircraft, so luckily I had 2 of them to mess with. Take a look at this and how much I had to cut this seat down to actually, you know, off of the, so basically sits like that. I had to cut a lot of that seat to get it to finally sit and sit in a way that the canopy could close. There we go. Lots of sanding, lots of cutting and sanding. Finally, you know, I did it, but I felt like it was important to put the American seat in the cockpit, since we really didn't do anything else to Americanize it besides paint it in the right colors that an American cockpit would be. So that seat to me told a whole separate story. And once it's in, once it's mounted, you know, you're not going to see much of the surgery besides it just, you know, being in there. So that works. So, you know, as I've been talking this out on camera, talking about the fins and the height and everything, I think I am going to go with mounting this F14 tail on there. It's going to make markings a lot easier. It's going to make them look natural to the airplane. It's going to bring that F14 element that I wanted into it. Going to be a little bit of a surgical procedure to get it to fit there without a weird gap, but we can do that. So I'm going to have to mount some bracing when I start working with these stabilators so that we don't lose the static dischargers on there, just like I did for the main wings. But so far things are going pretty good. So I'm going to mount up the air intakes. I'll probably do that off camera because it's just going to be gluing things on. And then we'll get to the process of fitting this vertical stabilizer onto this airplane right here. With all the changes going on with the plane, with the vertical stabilizer, and the addition of different weapons once we're done with it, I'm just not sure what that's going to do to the center of gravity and the weight. And I don't want to end up with a tail sitter, so I'm just adding a little bit of weight to the nose just in case. Not sure if I'm going to need it, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So, at this point we've got a lot of filling that's gone on some areas, specifically around this tail, which it needed it badly on the right side and where it meets on the leading edge, around the nose, and some other areas where we just want to tighten it up a little bit. So there's going to be a lot of sanding going on. I'm going to take this masking off. I'm probably going to have to put it back on just because, you know, when I sand, I want to make sure that we're really sanding only where we need to. There we go. And then we'll just have to shape this forward area around a little bit, and that looks pretty tight. I'm still not sure about the profile. It looks very F-111-y to me, with that large, kind of honestly very plain-looking vertical stabilizer. I mean, it has lost the lines of the MiG-23 a bit, in my opinion. But we're going to keep pressing. You know, when it's all done, it just, from the top, it still has that very classic MiG-23 look with the dog tooth leading edge. You know, the shape of the wing gloves and everything, and when we put on the horizontal stabilizers, it's very angular, and I'm not sure that this vertical stabilizer will really fit the shape, but I'm hoping that when we do the markings and we apply them all to the plane, that will tie this piece in to the rest of the project. It's taken a big risk to throw this thing on there, especially when we're building something that's going to be judged by others. They're going to have to not only judge the theme, you know, but I'm going to have to sell this as a complete piece, not just hey, it looks cool as an American plane. They're going to have to buy that this could be all together as one produced airplane. So risky to do for something in, you know, a contest, a competition kind of thing. It's not just to build in the, you know, the group and say, hey, look what I did. But you know what? I'll take that chance and we'll see. I'm hoping though that with this shape though, it is going to, when they see that bright tail flash on there with the Sundowners markings, it really is going to say this is the plane. The rest of it will be very recognizable as the MiG-23. I mean, it is what it is now. It's too late to go back, so all we can do is go all in and get this thing finished up. So sanding is not exciting to watch, so I'm going to sand this all off camera to get all these joints nice and smooth and flush, and then we'll see again when I've got it all ready to move on to the next step. Switching gears again, as we are switching gears all over this place, and I apologize if that is making it a little bit difficult for some to follow the progress here, but this is the nose gear for the MiG-23. This is the nose gear for the F-14. Now, it is two different brands, so often two different companies, you know, their scales are off a little bit, don't quite match, but wow. One, this is quite a bit bigger and beefier, as it needs to be for carrier landings. However, The MiG-23 is designed for rough field performance, so okay, we're going to work with what we got. The one thing that we don't have here that we see here, though, mainly, is this part, and this is the arm that would fold down and lock on to the shuttle for carrier takeoffs. This locks onto the little thing on the deck that is connected to the catapult. So what we're going to need to do is a little bit of surgery to remove this and connect it to this so that we can make this look like a carrier-based nose landing gear. So that should be fun, so let's get to that. So the reason that I've, jumped around to the landing gear at this point is because in order to kind of figure out where we're going to hang ordnance off this thing, I need to temporarily attach the landing gear to see where the plane sits on the ground so that I can attach some hard points and everything for some of the ordnance we're going to use, because I don't want to put stuff on there and then find out at the end when I actually try to sit the plane on the ground we've got missiles rubbing runway and stuff like that. So I'm just going to use some canopy glue. It's basically Elmer's glue, okay? It's PVA glue to temporarily glue the landing gear in place. And what this means is once we get this in there, we're not going to be able to touch the model for a little bit. All right, now these are mostly built. They're not fully built. There's a couple things left off them, but it's going to be good enough to put these on and then stick the wheels on so that we can just get a sense of where everything sits when we've got weight on wheels. After these are dry, we can actually affix some wheels, and then looks like that might hold pretty well. Then we can put some hard points on there, figure out where all these missiles are going to sit as we're getting ready to do some of the final steps before we get to priming and painting the whole thing. Well, you can't see anything of how this is working out off the ground. I've got a pretty good view, but the camera is directly overhead. So I have it sitting very precariously because this glue is not as strong as I'd hoped, but it's sitting. I can very carefully now take things like Phoenix launch rails and Phoenix missiles and sort of estimate where I can hang ordnance and figure out where it's going to go. I already know that, and these are on the actual F14 model, these hang kind of off the wing gloves. They're going to go on the plane, and they are going to, I'm not sure if they're going to be AIM-54s or if they're going to hold Sparrows, because on the F14 they can do either. So, having it actually sitting like this lets me make those kind of decisions, because there are little modifications I have to make depending on what kind of weapon it's going to hold. Obviously, I've got the ground clearance for either one right here, but placing it is important because we have to have clearance for landing gear retraction. I definitely want to include Phoenix and Sparrows and Sidewinders, if possible, because that's the whole complete span of armament that the F-14A could carry. Taking a look at all the hard points and pylons that come with the MiG-23 kit, everything is a two-piece assembly. So there's nothing that you just cut off and put on there. So these, for example, are the double launch rails for the AA-8s, and I'm considering using them, and these are the pylons that would attach them to the wings right here, and then putting actual Sidewinder launch rails onto these and using them under the fuselage to double the capacity, or maybe a Sidewinder, and a Sparrow. But, you know, since I also want to show, I mean, this is a complicated thing we're doing, converting this, but I want to show you guys the assembly process of the kit itself as well as we go. And like I said, I'm sorry this is all over the place and it's not a standard linear instruction build. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble a lot of these pylons and launch rails and everything is a two-step process. There's you know, a lot of kits just give you these pylons and everything as a single piece, but Trumpeter has molded all of them in, you know, left and right halves that you put together. So I'm going to be doing that as I go, so I can kind of fit them around and figure out where things go. All right, it's going to be a little sloppy with the camera work because we're going handheld for this. All right, so this is glued on permanently, and we've got ample clearance for a Phoenix on that station, and pretty sure we'll be able to put a Sidewinder over there under the wing without it bumping. Maybe we'll figure that out. So I did a little interesting operation here, and I'll show it to you when it's done. I have it PVA glued on to see if we can fit this double mount of a Sidewinder. Now this is an AA2 model, but it's a pretty good representation of an AIM-9J and, you know, an AIM-9 in general. It doesn't really matter what model it is. It lets us kind of test if we are able to sling a Sidewinder underneath the plane and have it clear the ground. And we are. That'll fit. That'll work. Now the next question is, can we throw a Sparrow onto this rack here and have it clear everything else? And yes, we can. And that's kind of what I was wondering. So I guess I don't need to be that. Yeah, that'll work. It'll give us a Sparrow, and it'll give us a Sidewinder over there. Now we could also, there's no way to fit a Phoenix. I mean, I could use another launch rail and put a Phoenix underneath, but I think the Phoenix is best carried on the glove pylon over there. So that works. It is kind of an awkward looking thing. What I might do is move it up. I'm gonna lose a wheel there. Might move it up to under the intake. That's where it would originally be mounted on the MiG-23. I think just moving it up a little bit more. You see what I did was I just took some launch rails for the AA2s, put them onto the actual rails for the AA8s, because they'd be too small to hold stuff like a Sidewinder or a Sparrow, and graft them all together. It's kind of cumbersome, but it works. Now I have it PVA glued in place. I think I said that already. Since we've got this upside down, if we had a Sidewinder launch rail over here, yeah, this will just about clear the wing. So we can put another Sidewinder over there. It'll give us a decent load, and it will do. It'll serve the purpose. It'll represent all three missiles. Who cares what other ways they might sling this, you know? It'll show me Phoenix, it'll show me Sparrows, it'll show me Sidewinders. I think I am going to end up, when I permanently mount this, move this under the intake right there, just to give it a little bit more ground clearance. And then, so this empty spot is where the gun would normally go. Can't have the gun center mounted if I want to put the TCS pod over there, so I'm going to have to fill this with something and mount it offset, like the F14's actual gun is offset. I mean, we still got work to go on this thing, but we're making progress as we go. Both of our intake mounted launch rails are on. We got the wing gloves rails on. I have to make the second Sidewinder rail, which is just, you know, this combination of parts from both kits. The original gun for the MiG-23 goes centerline, which is, you know, a good place for it. But if we want to Tomcat this thing up, which I mentioned before, we're going to have to put the TCS pod on the nose, which is going to go right about there. And I have a resin aftermarket one that is going to fit great. Obviously, we can't have the gun shooting straight through the camera pod, though. So what I did, and I did it off camera because there's nothing to see here, folks. It's just kind of boring. I took some plastic stock, pretty thin plastic stock. I cut out the initial hole right there, that space where the gun part would fit. I filled it, put some putty, sanded it down. So now what we're going to do is mount that TCS pod there, which we'll get to in a moment, but we're also going to figure out where we're going to put this gun. The gun in the actual F14 sits kind of in this area on the forward fuselage on this side. It would be roughly right about there. Now, I think we could, you know, again, it's a what if. We could fudge it a little bit and put it, you know, we're going to have to cut off these little side pieces, but we could put it just about over there, and it would kind of work. We could also position it a little farther back on the fuselage, right about there. And, you know, it wouldn't really be seen, though. We want it to be seen that we've thought this out, and we've put maybe right there-ish. But anyway, there are some pieces that go into making this gun, which we'll do just some internals after we get that TCS pod on there. You know, remember, we still have cockpit interior to finish and some odds and ends on the aircraft itself before we can get to the painting and the detailing. So, you know, I'll state it again, and I said it just a little bit ago, but the reason construction on this thing is bouncing all over the place is because there are these modifications that have to be made before we finish up the main construction, just so we know everything's going to fit. You know, this being this crazy project that it is. Here's our quick boost set for the ECM TCS equipment, well, what we call the TCS pod. Now, this is from an F14A. There are a few different models that they carried. I picked this one because I just like this particular one. Now, there's one with more of a bullet-shaped ECM fairing at the front. I like the actual camera pod. I like that they could use this to, you know, under GCI control. GCI are the unsung heroes of the air combat world, but we're not going to talk about them now. But as they were directed where to fly and how to intercept, they could have their radar completely off. So bad guys might not even know that they're there. They're getting like no signals from the F-14. They could use this pod and look many miles away with under direct steering control from their ground controller, and go and actually find the enemy with that and get in a good kill position before the enemy ever knew that they were there, because you can register signals from an enemy's radar far, far beyond the point that most radars will actually be able to actively track a target on their own. So this was before a lot of fighters had very reliable IRSTIS, infrared search and tracking systems, which they can kind of do the same thing with now on a lot of fighters. The MiG-29 was one of the, and the Su-27 were some of the first to really integrate that as a weapon system. And then I believe that, you know, it became popular on a lot of other fighters. And the F-16F that is only used by very, well, one country that I would speak of anyway, but UAE flies that version, the Block 60, and I don't know why we don't use it, but it integrates it, you know, some others. But anyway, so this is going to get mounted, and it actually, you know, it gives kind of that F-14 profile, you know, under the nose. Very easy to add on. So now this has all these other pieces I'll put on later because they're very small, very fragile. So we'll do that kind of at the end when we're attaching all of our little antennas and stuff. We'll just get this guy set up under the fuselage, and then we'll work on the gun. This little guy goes together with just one part from the C-sprue going into the gun mount, It's just the twin 23mm barrels. Now, there's the option to put some photo etch on there. I'm gonna go without it because I think for our purposes we don't need that. I like the nice streamlined look of it, so I'm just gonna use it as is. What I did though is I opened up these vents, which you probably cannot even see. There's some little vents there and there alongside the guns. I'm gonna snip off these panels on the sides though, so it can fit flush with wherever we put it. And that's going to be kind of the only modding we're going to do on this, because I want it to look very similar to the way the F14's gun is mounted, which is much more internal than this. But you know, we're gonna make do with what we got here. I am still gonna have to sand down these, which is not that big a deal, but I'll do that. And we'll figure out exactly where we're gonna put this, and I am leaning towards that positioning we had before, which would be kind of right there. So it's visible, it's apparent, but it's not getting in the way of stuff. I think that works pretty well. Looks kind of cool where it is. So it meets all of our requirements, especially the rule of cool, which is probably the most important one, right? After the cannon went on, I couldn't leave well enough alone with the tail, so I cut off a little tip to help better match the shape of MiG-27 tail. It still doesn't have the same profile. It's going to have the F14 shape, and it's going to match the decals better, but because the decals on this just wouldn't fit at all. But I just had to give it that little angular part. It was killing me. I don't know if I did good or bad, but I did it, so it's done. But I think it'll, you know, the thing is, you can't tell on the wingtips here, but they have that kind of angle cut. The stabilators have that angle cut, and you had the big rounded tail that just didn't fit the shape of anything else. So I did it. The decision's made. Sometimes when you're doing the what ifs, you just got to go with your gut and say it needs to, and that way at least everything kind of fits the aesthetic, and you don't want it to look out of place. You want it to look like it all organically goes together. So it does. It does now, at least. A little better anyway than it did before. So now I'm going to return. This is basically most of the fuselage type mods that need to happen to do this. I also built the centerline drop tank, which is remarkably small, especially for an interceptor type. The underwing drop tanks are just not going to really fit well in any kind of way unless I only pose it with the wings extended. Even if I were to work it that I can twist them. I built one somewhere. Yeah. They're gonna bang into the wing ordnance unless I only pose it at a very shallow sweep. It's just not gonna work out. It'll look good, but I mean it won't work out with the ordnance. So we'll have to fill those and just go with this one drop tank underneath. This hole needs to be filled, but you know, we'll get to all that. We're now really ready to go back to construction to finish off the actual aircraft so that we can get to the painting and everything, and do some little bits that I had left off for fear of breakage and everything as we moved it around. There's some little tiny parts, and in the instructions I had circled some of these little tiny parts to remind myself to go back and put them on later. I've got our seat all PE'd up and adjusted to fit the cockpit and weathered and ready to go in there. Made some final additions to the cockpit itself, so we're ready to put this seat in, and that will get the cockpit itself pretty much finished up. This is the last thing it's waiting for, really. It's just the seat. I want to be really gentle with the photo etch there. little bit of red on top of that ejection handle. That ought to do it. So we're at now just about finished with the cockpit. There's just one or two more little tiny details that need to be done in there. Once that's done, I'm going to permanently affix the windscreen. I'm going to PVA glue down the canopy because I want it in the end posed in the open position, but just for painting and all that stuff, we'll have it closed, you know, for typical painting purposes. But this is probably going to lose the canopy and the windscreen there. This is really starting to come together after all this time and working and making things up and figuring it out. I'm so glad that I have really all the basics that I need to have done now done, and I can actually proceed with the real work, you know, the hard work of making it look like a real airplane, with the painting and the detailing out and all that. So some very basic few assembly steps and pieces to go, and we're going to do that in the next video. Still have weapons to assemble. Okay, we've got landing gear pretty much built, right? So that's going to get put on, you know, at the end, but we got to get that all painted up. We've got to trim off landing gear doors and such, get them ready. And just those, like I said, last little details. But we've got big steps ahead of us for priming, painting, detailing, lots of decals to put on this thing. And to be honest, with the deadline for the build coming up, not a lot of time to do it. So I hope that this part wasn't too boring, just with the process of trying to get all the pieces fit and figure out exactly what it's really going to look like. I think it's a fun project. I think it's a cool project. It's certainly a challenging what if to kind of come up with, you know, with all the airframe modifications that have gone into it to Americanize this and make it as F14 like as possible, but still retain that 70% MiG-23. So join me in the next part where we will start the real work on really making it look like an American fighter. From all the visualness, you know, that goes into it. It's come a long way from the original kit. So if you're building your own stuff at home, as always, keep building them, build them well. Thanks for joining me on this part, and join me again real soon for the next one.